Hi everybody, welcome back to our Future Ed IELTS Online Foundation course, and tonight we're looking at the academic writing task 1, and we're moving on to lesson 2, and we're going to have a further look at line graphs and look at another sentence structure and some more language to use in our line graphs. So welcome everybody, and let's get straight into it. This one's going to be longer than last time. Make sure you've got your pens ready. Do take notes or take screenshots. There will be little tests along the way. So first of all, let's start with adding to our bank of vocabulary for our line graphs. And the first thing we want to be able to do is talk about the highest point on the graph, because this is something quite important. And there it is in this little simple sample. And the language we're going to use to talk about that are car sales reached a peak of 800 in February. So have a look at that language and my reached a peak. And then have a look at that preposition of. So car sales reached a peak of. I can also say that another way, and that is I could say car sales reached a high point of, and once again, just notice that preposition. So generally, there's usually only one peak in a graph. Occasionally, you might see two. And so maybe just pick one, write it again and again, and get it fast, get it accurate. Let's have a look at the next vocabulary point. Here we want to be able to talk about the lowest point on our graph, which is also notable and definitely we need to mention. And here we can say car sales reached a low of 200 in February. So once again, there's that verb reached a low of, and I've taken that word into low of, or I could say car sales reached a low point of 200. And another word that we could use in this instance is car sales hit a trough of, and that little trough is right at that little V point there, the lowest point, and we call that a trough. So note the spelling of that word, and once again the collocation is very tight, so that's all the vocabulary you need to use for that one. Let's see what else there is to add. What if there's no change? What if I end up with a portion in a graph that looks a little bit like a table? These are very simplified, of course, but we will have a look at more realistic versions a little bit later on. And here we could use several different sentences. We could use the words remained stable. Again, remained stable, my verb plus adverb. We could use remained steady. Or we could say remained constant. And here I can use the verb stayed constant. But notice I haven't put it in front of stayed stable or stayed steady. It sounds better if I just use it with stayed constant. So just again, once again, just pick one of those and use it again and again, get it fast and accurate. What if my changes vary? What if my changes go up and down a little bit like this graph? And then there are many ways in which it could do that. But as you can see, my graph is largely horizontal with a few fluctuations up and down. And so that's the verb that I could use. Car sales fluctuated around 100. Or we could say car sales fluctuated at around 100. That at always indicates the point of around 100. Let's have a look if the changes fluctuate up. If I get this kind of line, this is a more realistic representation, and obviously we're not going to write about every little change, but we're looking at writing about the predominant trend, and we're going to say car sales fluctuated up, and in this graph, rapidly is a good word to describe it. Have a look at that, fluctuated up. There's my verb and a preposition. So car sales fluctuated up. And then, of course, the opposite would be fluctuating down. Car sales fluctuated down, and in this case, again, dramatically. That there's my standard trend, and as we can see, it's a pretty steep decline. So fluctuate up, fluctuate down, fluctuate around. Now let's have a look at how much did my figures change. And here we're going to be talking about our units. So what I'm doing with these notes is I'm building up small chunks of language, and there are a few more we're going to do, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start putting them all together. Remember I mentioned in the earlier lesson that my collocation is very tight, and so these are the words you need to use. You don't actually need much else, and the tighter you keep it, the more accurate your language of reporting will be. So let's have a look here. So how much did the figures change? So obviously they're going to vary, and I'm going to take my cue once again from my units, and we're going to indicate, and we're going to use from to. So always from my lowest point, for example, and then to the next highest point that I mentioned. And of course, we're always moving in this direction, aren't we? So first of all, let's have a look. Car sales increased moderately from 20 to just under 40. So there's my first point, 20, and my 40 is probably round about there. And have a look at how I've used that just under 40. Because it's not exact, this gives me a few extra words. And I can also say, next, what happened was car sales remained constant at around 38, which of course is just under 40, isn't it? So the next section, I'm going to be pretty straight there, not a lot of change. So my sales remained constant at around 38. And again, notice that preposition. These prepositions are really important. You want to get them accurate, especially if you want that 7. Let's have a look at my next sentence. Car sales, that should have an S on it. Car sales rose substantially from 38 to 84. So there's my substantial rise, and although it varies, we're looking at from this point over here to this point over here, and we're talking about a substantial rise during that period of time. So I could say car sales rose substantially from 38 to 34. Or once again, I could say car sales began to level off. Now, at that point where they start to become horizontal, that's what we talk about, level off. And there's a beautiful verb pattern, began to level off at approximately 90 and then remain stable. And then I can talk about car sales plummeted dramatically. So there we are, plummeting dramatically from just below 90 right down to 10 and hit a trough of 10. And we'll be combining all of this in just a little while. And then once again after that, and I haven't written that sentence there, but we could say that car sales went up dramatically or went up steeply. Let's have a look at our next slide and how we talk about our next change. So our next change is we're going to talk about when did these changes happen. So not only do I have to mention my units, which we've just done, and those are on my vertical axis, now we're also going to be talking about our time. And this, once again, we're going to pick up from my horizontal axis. So there's my time, July, August, September, okay? And remember that this was to 2019 and then moved into 2020. So now I'm going to be talking about my period of time. And once again, I'm going to be using these prepositions from, to, or, between, and, okay? Now we can never say from, we can never say between two. So get that collocation correct and vary them. You could use each one of them, show the examiner that you can use these accurately. And there are my sentences once again. So if I have a look at my graph, my first sentence, car sales increased moderately from July to August. And there it is, a little moderate increase, increased moderately. My second sentence, car sales dropped steadily from August to September. And there it is, my car sales dropped during that little period in time. Now, when we're describing a graph, we're not necessarily going to describe on the purpose of practicing our prepositions to talk about when, but just for the moment, we're practicing using each up and each down. But when we move on, we're going to be looking at the main trends, and we won't be describing each up and each down. So let's have a look at the next sentence. Car sales grew substantially between September and December. Now I've written them in short there, but don't do this in the exam. Do extend and write the full sentence. And of course, always remember to start your September, your months of the year with a capital. In some languages, they don't do this, but in English, for that accuracy, make sure you start your months with a capital. So there they are. My sales are growing substantially over that period of time. And then after that, car sales fluctuated between December and April. So what I've done this time is I've grouped that area there where it goes up and down, and I've referred to it as fluctuating between December 19 and April 20. And finally, car sales soared dramatically between May and June. Okay. And have a look at my sentence. Car sales reached a peak in May. So I can't use my from, to, or my between, and for my verb reached a peak. My verb and my noun reached a peak, because this is one particular point in one particular point of time. So there I've just got to talk about in May. And so we can't use from, to, and between, and when we talk about reached a peak of 120, for example, in May, or perhaps reached a trough of 25 in September. So let's start putting this together. First of all, we're going to vary that sentence structure. So remember in lesson 1, we had a look at our sentence structure: verb plus adverb. And just a quick revision, there they are: increased slowly, rise marginally, grow substantially, go up moderately, And then my more extreme, rocket dramatically, or I could say rocket up dramatically, and then soar dramatically. So let's have a look now at how I change this to start writing my sentence structure number B, which is using an adjective plus a noun. So I'm going to take my adverb and I'm going to turn it into an adjective by taking that ly off. And I'm going to take my verb and I'm going to turn it into a noun, increase. So sales increased slowly, I can also write as there was a slow increase. So rise marginally becomes a marginal rise. Grows substantially becomes substantial growth. But have a look at this one. These two verbs, this verb go up. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, I can't see this little line here. What am I talking about? This verb here, grow and go up. These verbs I can use in my verb and adverb structure. But when I transferred grow substantially, I talk about substantial growth. Notice here, it's a little bit smaller, but notice that that one is crossed out. So I don't use my article when I talk about growth, because once again, growth is kind of uncountable. I don't talk about one growth, two growths, three growths, but I can talk about one rise, two rises, three rises. So there's one that to note, never use a substantial growth. And when we get to this verb, go up, this is not a verb that translates into an adjective. So I'm not going to say a moderate go up. Okay, it's not going to translate, into my noun. So I can't use this one. I can only use go up with my verb and adverb structure. And similarly for rocket dramatically, I can't say a dramatic rocket up. And the same goes for the verb soar. I can't say a dramatic soar. So these ones here are out of the picture. We can only use these verbs in my adjective and noun in sentence B. We'll move on to how we can extend that a little further. So here we have my sentence structure B, adjective plus noun. And now I'm going to add a little more to my sentence to make it a full sentence. First of all, I'm going to add there is or there was. This is what we call my empty subject. This now becomes my subject. There was a or there was an. There was a steady rise and in car sales. Have a look at that in. And this now becomes my topic. And it's now after my adjective plus noun structure. So I'm going to give you a few minutes and I want you to just take from your notes, write there was sentences using your adjective and noun structure. And let's have a look at some sentences. Your sentences look something like this. So notice how I've used the different tenses here. There is, there was, there has been. And then notice how, again, with my noun growth, there's no indefinite article. There was substantial growth. And once again, notice that in. There was a substantial growth in car sales is my preposition there. And let's move on to the next slide. Where we change should be my adjective plus noun structure. And there we have there is, there was, there has been, I think. And for homework, what I suggest you do is I suggest you write out these sentences, practice them with the different verbs, practice them with different adjectives and different nouns. And once again, work to get them fast and get them accurate so that you can write these building block parts of the sentences very, very quickly. Let's move on. So you might want to take a screenshot of that one. Once again, there we are using a number of different verbs. Have a look at the difference in my topic. Here I'm using both car sales and rice production. I'm still using there is or there was a slow decline in rice production. There has been or there was substantial growth in rice production. Good. And let's move on to the next slide. Now let's work at varying our topic sentence. Our topic sentence with my verb and adverb structure is obviously my subject or my subject clause. And we don't want to just write an essay talking about car sales went up, car sales went down, car sales hit a peak of. We want to be able to vary our subject clause because this is where I can show the examiner that I can vary my vocabulary and I can also vary my sentence structure, the structure of my clause a little bit. So let's have a look. There's my very basic one, which was taken from my title, car sales. And I'd suggest perhaps you use that just a little bit down, further down in your writing. See how I varied it to sales of motor cars increased gradually, or motor vehicle sales. This is one that's really useful, the number of cars that were sold. And if I want to get really fancy, and I could say something like the number of motor cars that were driven off the shop floor. But we'll get to that sort of writing much later on because that's the sort of writing that's going to get me that 7. So I want to be able to vary my subject clause. Okay, if I want to get more than a 4.5 or a 5, I want to vary my subject clause. And then I want to practice varying my verb as we've done. I've often seen car sales increased, car sales decreased, car sales increased. And that's not really showing the examiner in 150 words what I can actually write. And then, of course, we need to select appropriate adverbs for how much my graph is changing. So that's a quick look at my topic or my subject clause in my verb plus adverb structure, sentence structure number A. I'll just give you a minute to make a note of that. Okay, now let's move on and see what that looks like and how I vary my sentence structure, my topic sentence, my subject clause with sentence structure B. And there it is. So this time it is going to come after my adjective plus noun, topic clause. So let's have a look at my sentence. There is a slight rise in car sales. Or there was moderate growth in the sales of motor cars. Or in motor car sales. Or there has been a steep decline in vehicle sales. I could also use a word like automotive vehicle sales. And then I'm going to use my little subject clause with my relative clause. There is a sharp increase in the number of cars that was sold. And once again, there was a marginal decrease in the number of motor cars that were driven off the factory floor. And I do apologize about these verbs. My slides have been upgraded for me. Okay. So once again, we're going to notice that there was moderate growth with no article. Once again, we're varying our adjective according to the gradient of our graph. And once again, we are selecting different verbs. Sorry, different nouns. These are nouns now, different nouns, varying my vocabulary. So now we're going to look again at how to talk about how much the figures change. And once again, we're going to have a look at our units on the horizontal axis. And there's my subject-verb structure. Sorry, my verb plus, there's my topic subject, clause, and my verb plus adverb structure. And now I'm going to add how much. So we've seen this. My sales of motor vehicles went up gradually from 20 to just below 40. Or I could say the number of cars that were sold fell substantially from 80 to 10. And now I'll give you a few minutes to just practice writing some more sentences using the graph above. And let's check, did you get some sentences that look like this? Did I write some more? So now let's move on and let's add, when did these changes happen? So now I'm really getting towards my full sentence, aren't I? Notice that we can put our time when it happened. We can either put it right at the beginning of the sentence, or we can add it right at the end of the sentence. And this is really useful because it means that I can alternate that to make my sentences less repetitive. So there are my sentences from July to September. Car sales rose slowly from 20 to just under 40. Or I could say, car sales rose slowly from 20 to just under 40 from July to September. And I can tack that onto the end of my sentence. And then I move on to my next sentence, from September to December 19. Now remember that we were looking at this graph, and it's possibly indicated here that we've got 2019, and halfway through we move into 2020. So the examiner could actually do this just to test how I manage my language around the change in the year. It comes September to December, car sales increased substantially from just under 40 to approximately 90. And then have a look after that, or following that, which is my sequence, isn't it? We're talking, it's my time sequence, my words to talk about sequence in time. After following, the cars remained constant at around 90 for 3 months. So notice how I've changed it here. For, I can also use for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months. And if it's a financial year, for the first quarter or the last quarter, for example. So these are places where I can vary my language, and I can vary how I start my sentences to create more variety. Good. So now practice writing some of your own sentences, and start from September 19, car sales, and then still using verb and adverb structure, sentence structure number A, move into how much did they change and when did the figures change. And I'll give you 2 to 3 minutes to write sentences like those ones. Right, I'll just let you finish that sentence. And let's move on. So did you have some sentences that looked something like this? Of course, once we start varying when, all our sentences will look different, but what's important is my word order. And what's important is that I don't add a time phase at the beginning and then repeat it at the end. So I just need to have it either at the beginning of my sentence or at the end of my sentence. Now we're just writing life. For example, if I were to say sentence number 1, from July to September 19, car sales increased slightly from 20 to just below 40. After that, sales stayed constant at around 40 for 1 month. But when I'm actually writing this essay, I don't need to repeat my 40 because I've got it right there, just in the sentence before. So notice how I've put brackets around it, because at this point, I can actually leave it out, because we've stated that if it's remained steady or constant, then it's going to remain at around 40, and that's been stated already and remains unsaid. So my sentence could also read, from July to September 19, car sales increased slightly from 30 to just below 40, and after that, sales stayed constant for 1 month. And this is how, using this very, very tight sentence structure, I can actually make it a little bit less mechanical just by dropping that clause, because we've already mentioned it in the sentence just before that. Let's look at the next one. Then, from October to the end of the year, which of course is another way of saying December, and have a look, I get a quick, to the end of the year, I get a quick 5 words there. Sales of cars rose steadily from just below 40 to approximately 90. And once again, I could possibly even just leave out that first part, because we've already mentioned the 40. So I could actually just say, and then from October to the end of the year, sales of cars rose steadily to approximately 90. Or I could also say to approximately a peak, to a peak of approximately 90. But we'll look at how to include peaks and troughs a little later on. Our next sentence, starting with thereafter. Thereafter, figures remained steady until February 20. And because once again, I've mentioned that, what I've got up about 80s. Notice how I've changed that slightly. I've said to approximately 90 over there. And because we've got this point here where we're not really quite, it's not that easy to identify. I think that's the one there. It's very small on my screen. But have a look at how I've written it a slightly different way. Figures remained steady at just above 80. So there's another way that I can vary, talking about how much. And then have a look at this until February 20. So there's another little preposition that I can get in there. But also have a look at this very useful little word, figures. Okay, that's a very useful way of getting around it. I've seen students writing a lot of these graphs and they go, it remained and it did this and it did that. Yeah, I think we could get away with it once, but figures is going to take me into a different league. So there's another useful word that we can use just to break the monotony of car sales, car sales, car sales. Okay. So then I could say, in February 2020, the amount of cars that were sold plunged steeply. And again, from 90, which I could leave out, I could just say to approximately 10, or to approximately 10. So now you can see that we've really constructed our sentences using my verb plus adverb structure, sentence structure number A. And we've extended it to include our subject or our topic. And then we've further extended it to talk about how much And now we've completed it by adding when. So this is pretty much how we can write these sentences. And of course, there are a couple of other changes in the next lesson that we do. I'll show you how to link these sentences using different linkers. But this gives me a very strong structure. It gives me a very accurate sentence that's going to get me a very high score. And when you've got the language, when you've got the vocabulary and you've got this word order, it's actually really remarkably simple, isn't it? So let's have a look at what's coming up next. So here is another graph, and if you can make a screenshot of this, if that's at all possible, or it will, I guess it will be available in the uploads, and you will be able to access it again. So here's a graph that I want you to use for practice. And what I want you to do is I want you to write exactly the kind of sentences as we wrote in the previous slide, using this line graph. And of course, I've given you a slightly different topic. And notice that this time it's wheat production. And this one is going to be uncountable, isn't it? We don't talk about one production, two productions, three productions. So I want you to think about how you're going to vary your topic sentence. And then I want you to change. For the purposes of this exercise of practicing writing these sentences in this sentence structure as accurately and as fast as possible, do write each section for the practice in writing the sentence. At the moment, we're just writing sentences. Okay? So whereas on the day, we might actually talk about how this graph declined, how sales, or now we're talking about wheat production, aren't we? How wheat production declined steadily over that period of time. For your purposes of writing sentences, describe each one so that you can practice writing when and how much. And then later on, when we come to actually looking at analyzing those 4 points, we'd probably combine all of that into 1 point. Good. Now, once you've done that in your verb plus adverb structure, I want you to take the same graph and I want you to write sentences using your adjective plus noun structure. So that you practice putting your topic sentence first at the beginning of a sentence, and then you practice putting your topic sentence at the end of a sentence. And if you want to email some of those in, I won't be able to look at them, or I won't be able to mark them all individually, but certainly what I'll do is I'll cast my eye over them and I'll pull out any common errors, and I can put a little sheet together and we can just point out some of the errors that happen only too easily. So today in lesson 2, we've covered new vocabulary to talk about high and low points. That's reaching a peak, reaching a trough, or hitting a trough. And we've spoken about how to talk about fluctuations. Fluctuate up, fluctuate down, fluctuate around. We've looked at how to talk about change by talking about how much have the figures changed, how much have the figures gone up or down. And remember, those are the figures on my vertical axis. And then we've talked about what language to use to talk about when these changes happened. And those months and years we found on our horizontal axis. We've also looked at how I can vary my topic and extend it into a subject clause, and how I can write various different kinds of subject clause, varying my vocabulary. And we've also had a look at an additional new structure, and that is my sentence structure number B, using adjective plus verb. And we've also practiced writing a couple of simple sentences, and I hope you have time to practice a few more for homework, and just email them through to Morshed. He'll flick them straight onto me, and I'll include anything I detect in those in our next lesson, lesson number 3 in line graphs. So in the next lesson that I do on line graphs, I'm going to be covering the following. We're going to be putting all of these sentences together into a report of about 150 words. And we're going to write a short introduction. And we're going to write an overview paragraph where we describe the main trend. Remember the word that we used in the very first slide up tonight, and that was we need to analyze a report. So what we're going to do is we're going to be analyzing the figures, analyzing the trends, and generally there's one main trend that we can comment on. And then we'll analyze it in more detail, and we'll write a paragraph including 3 to 4 main points and possibly a point of interest if we can find one. And then most importantly, I'm going to show you how to use linking words to join some of these sentences so that we create some compound sentences and also some more complex structures. So remember, if you want to get a level 7, we need to see, in your writing, we need to see quite a good number of compound and more complex structures. So we're going to be working on how to write these as well. And then in later lessons, what we'll do is we'll look at, obviously this is for very simple tonight. We've just had a look at very simple, basic building blocks in language. But it's highly unlikely we'll be given a graph with just one graph. Very often there may be 2 or 3 or even 4 line graphs. And so what we'll need to do is we'll need to look at how to write about more than one line on a graph. The other topic that sometimes comes up in our line graphs is sometimes they ask us to give a reason for the fall in, for example, in wheat production. Perhaps there was a drought, so we need to say that wheat production fell in the years 2010 to 2015 due to a prolonged drought. And that gives me an opportunity to use language to talk about reasons why the graph changes. So there are many, many topics that we can cover, but this is the basics. This is the absolute basic building blocks for your language of movement. And this will later, as you'll see, transfer into bar graphs, because sometimes bar graphs are also reflected as change over time. And we can translate this language into our line graph if it's also change over time. So that's everything for this evening.